before we get into all the Bitcoin topics, maybe give the viewers and the listeners some background of who you are and especially why you're excited about Bitcoin.
Yeah, totally. So I'm Stephen Cole. I am co-founder and CEO of Castle, and Castle is a Bitcoin company. We're the easiest way for businesses in the US to buy Bitcoin, establish a Bitcoin treasury, and manage Bitcoin treasuries. Prior to founding Castle and I suppose prior to Bitcoin, I was really involved in web technology. I spent about 10 years in Silicon Valley and went there right after I finished school, studied computer science, and I spent a decade kind of immersed in the Silicon Valley web technology scene. So the first 4 years of my career, I was at eBay, and that was back when eBay and PayPal were one big company together. And so, kind of learned the ins and outs of big enterprises there. And then I really got enchanted with startups and that notion of a small group of people who are on a mission on something they think is really important, with just no bureaucracy or nonsense getting in the way. So I fell in love with startups, had a couple journeys in the cloud computing and AI space as an early employee of startups around the Valley. And then that was about 2017, and the AI company I was working for at the time, called Nirvana Systems, was acquired by Intel. I stayed at Intel for a little while. I tried to get people within Intel excited about Bitcoin, and I failed miserably to do that. And I decided to leave and just focus all of my energy on investing into early stage companies. So pivoted a little bit from engineering to kind of venture capital, angel investing, and an early stage VC. And a big emphasis of the investing that I did and still continue to do to some extent was on the Bitcoin sector.
Interesting. And you have a really unique background. How do you think your unique background, how has this shaped your way of understanding how you look at Bitcoin today?
Man, what comes to mind when you ask that question is the block size wars in Bitcoin. And that was a pivotal moment in my Bitcoin journey because I felt like during my tenure managing engineering teams and kind of architecting big distributed systems, I gained this big respect for simplicity and for scalability, and I just saw numerous times where there would be these things that seemed like good ideas on the surface, and then when you actually dug in, there was so much nuance and there were so many edge cases to it, and I interfaced with a variety of different folks in my career, different personalities and communication styles. And one persona that I encountered over and over was kind of the cocky know-it-all engineer who, will loudly proclaim, this is absolutely what we should do. Anyone who says otherwise is wrong, and kind of my way or the highway. And then there were the more, maybe quiet, thoughtful folks who are not as loud, not as comfortable even trying to be loud, but they really understand all of these edge cases. They just spend a lot of time thinking about the ways in which things can go wrong that are not obvious unless you're really deep inside the system all the time. And so in Bitcoin's history, for listeners who aren't as familiar with the block size wars, there was this formative period in Bitcoin that kind of spanned like 2013 or 14 until 2017. And it stemmed from a disagreement about how Bitcoin should scale. So there was one group that felt like we need to make sure that on-chain payments in Bitcoin are always free or virtually free. And so in order to ensure that transaction fees don't rise, we should raise this parameter called the block size. We should make the blocks in Bitcoin's blockchain larger. And on the surface, that might seem like a fine idea at first. But then the other side of that camp kind of said, no, maybe that's not the right thing. Maybe we should take this more measured long-term approach to scaling where we don't just keep kicking the can down the road by changing this block size, but we scale up in layers and we do clever stuff like this thing called the Lightning Network that didn't exist back then. And I think seeing the debate and seeing those two sides where you kind of had the core developers who were largely on the side of don't change the block size, instead scale in layers and preserve the immutability of Bitcoin's core kind of consensus rules, versus all of these people, these other developers. Like there was a guy named Mike Hearn who left Google to contribute code to Bitcoin. He was kind of one of those very loud, arrogant, my way or the highway types of folks. And seeing that back and forth actually helped open my eyes to what makes Bitcoin special. Because initially I thought, yeah, like cheap payments seem fine, so why don't we just raise the block size? And it led me to try to understand the argument from the small block side and from some of the core developers like Peter Woola and Greg Maxwell and Adam Back. And in doing so, it opened my eyes to, wow, actually, this whole Bitcoin thing, what sets it apart from the other coins, what makes it special, is that some of these rules can't be changed. Like like the supply cap, for example, 21 million coins. That immutability and that resistance to change that we get through decentralization, what if that's actually what makes Bitcoin unique and special? And that is to be preserved and fought for. And I hadn't been thinking about it in that way at all before that. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And my confidence in Bitcoin just 10x'd from there.
That's crazy. Because when you think about the moment in it, and I unfortunately wasn't there, and probably also a lot of the viewers were not there at the block size. Well, it seems like crazy long ago. It's now like it's 8 years gone. Like that seems that's ages in Bitcoin time. It's like 80 years in Bitcoin time, and so it's a while ago. But it's so interesting how this miracle of Bitcoin came to be, and how at every step the way it grew in the best possible way, and not too fast, not too slow, where it still preserved the decentralization, the security of it, but still also attracted a lot of people to talk about it and work on it. And even people that maybe didn't have the best intentions, or maybe just had a different way for Bitcoin. And it's still preserved through this time without a head, without a marketing team, without a CTO or anything of that. When we talk about Silicon Valley and when we talk about scaling companies, that's the ultimate goal of every founder, doing 2-3 years of work, starting something, and this becoming so much bigger than you've ever imagined it, and it just rolls on its own, and it's actually better working because you're not involved. It's kind of magical when you take us back to this historical moment.
Yeah, it really is very special and fun to reflect on. And there's a great book entitled The Block Size War by, man, I'm blanking on his name, Jonathan someone, who I believe now is at BitMEX Research, and highly recommend that book to anyone who's interested in learning more about that period of time.
I think you worked at PayPal also, right?
The paper, I wrote a lot of tweets. I think I wrote a Medium post about the block size wars. Nothing that particularly blew up or is held up as canon in Bitcoin history, but I was trying to be fairly active in evangelism during that time. Partly because, like you said, it was driven home for me that wow, Bitcoin doesn't have a marketing department. And unlike these other coins that, are getting spun up and doing ICOs, and they have pre-mines and all kinds of allocations they can carve out just for marketing to pay people big bucks to say nice things about their projects, Bitcoin doesn't have any of that. And so if you are one of the few people who understands and appreciates Bitcoin and believes it's important, then there is no one else but you and other believers like that who are really around and incentivized to tell the world about it.
Interesting. I love to hear more. Really interesting. And just to have some background on that, you're doing also Castle, which is focused on Bitcoin companies and their strategies. What is that all about?
That's right. Yeah. Happy to dive into more of what we're up to at Castle. So I'm the co-founder of Castle. My co-founder, and he's now the CTO, his name is Joao Almeida. He was previously the co-founder and CTO of OpenNode, the Lightning payments company. And he and I have known each other for about 6 years now. We've been good friends for a while, and I was rooting for him and the whole OpenNode crew in their journey back in 2018 when they launched. And he actually started the company that is now Castle, and then we reconnected around it, and we decided to partner up shortly after. And Castle is a platform that's focused on making it as easy as possible for businesses in the US to buy and hold Bitcoin, to use it as a savings technology, as a treasury asset on their balance sheet. And we're not really serving huge corporations. We're not going after like MicroStrategy and Wall Street and megacorps like that. We're really focused on purpose building something for all of the other businesses in between, like small and medium businesses, cash flowing businesses that range from your local coffee shop or your barber shop all the way to, mid-market corporations doing hundreds of millions in annual revenue. So building the suite of tools and integrations that companies like that need and can benefit from when it comes to being successful in holding Bitcoin and using it to amplify their business.
That's super interesting. And you also had this history, and I looked at it yesterday, so I don't remember exactly. I looked at your podcast yesterday with Robert Breedlove, where he talked about the WikiLeaks story with PayPal, which I found was interesting. How did you come to that?
Yeah. So I'll preface all of it by saying I've always been really attracted to just the internet and even to cybersecurity since a young age. So when I was like between the ages of 12 and 16, I was always on the computer. I was I was very blessed to be one of the first houses in our small town in Missouri where I grew up, where high bandwidth internet became available, like DSL, and so I remember kind of convincing my parents that we should have this, and how amazing I thought it was. And so I was constantly immersed in online communities. I think by the age of 15, I had like thousands of posts on online hacker forums and cybersecurity forums, because I was just always really intrigued with that world. And so I wasn't like on the cypherpunks mailing list or thinking about cryptography or anything of that nature. But, a few years after Bitcoin was created, one high profile incident revolved around WikiLeaks. So Julian Assange's journalist organization that's kind of oriented around free speech. And WikiLeaks had been revealing a lot of bad stuff that powerful people had been doing and that powerful governments had been doing. And back when, I think this was 2010 when this went down, I was 2 years into my gig at eBay, and at the time eBay owned PayPal. And I was like in the part of the campus where both of those companies had a presence. There were like some buildings that were PayPal only and some that were eBay only. And I was in one of the few that was both PayPal and eBay. And so the teams interfaced a lot and strategized together a lot. And I remember there was all of this drama and back and forth when the leadership at PayPal decided to ban WikiLeaks, to censor payments that were being donated to WikiLeaks. And at the time, that was really their lifeblood. They were relying on those funds for operations. And so they started instead accepting payment in Bitcoin. Or maybe they already were taking payment in Bitcoin, but then like after all the PayPal stuff went down, then more donation volume started to flow towards the Bitcoin side. I can't remember that detail, but it ended up being a big happening within Bitcoin, because at the time Bitcoin was still very much in its infancy. It got a lot of eyes on the project, and there are posts even from Satoshi Nakamoto, who was still around at the time, that were kind of like, is this actually the type of attention that we want right now when we're this small of a project, and are we going to be able to survive this? And Satoshi had a forum post that's one of his that gets referenced quite a bit, of along the lines of, don't kick the hornet's nest. Like, it's too early to be kicking the hornet's nest. We don't necessarily want the CIA and the intelligence community and all of these powerful entities to really have Bitcoin in their crosshairs quite yet. The project needs to mature a little bit. But I was in some of those rooms at PayPal where those decisions were made to censor those payments, and then literally afterwards, the online organization called Anonymous, they responded by doing a distributed denial of service attack against PayPal's infrastructure. So they were basically just trying to take down the PayPal website 24/7 as, backlash for that censorship. And so, I, like a lot of my buddies, worked on the firewall and cybersecurity teams at PayPal. And so it was just an insane few weeks where they're up like 24/7 trying to make sure that the firewalls are blocking this traffic and that legitimate users can still use PayPal. And so, yeah, being kind of in the trenches of the technical operations there, I didn't fully appreciate, like, I hadn't really heard of Bitcoin at the time, but it drove home the threat of centralized kind of finance to me, traditional finance, where those few powerful people in a room, either of their own volition or because a government calls them and says you have to do this, they can cut off the funding of an organization that is saying we're doing things that they don't like. And at some point it can become kind of an informal extension of the government. And so that was unsettling to me. And it was the first time that I remember in my career thinking, wait a minute, like, are we the good guys? Is that, like, yeah, I like this fintech stuff. It's cool. Online payments are great. We're like moving the world forward with financial IT, but there are some aspects of this that we need to think hard about. And so that really stuck with me.
It's the and I think a lot about that because people ask me, and I literally got a comment today like, oh, like, why are you saying Bitcoin makes the world better? That sounds like a cult. And I get that because in the first thing is like, oh yeah, it's a nice asset. And oh yeah, it stores value. Oh yeah, maybe it's a medium of exchange. But I truly believe that if we don't have financial freedom, the other freedoms are very hard to achieve. I don't think that's impossible, but I think a true freedom, like freedom of speech, other freedoms that we have, that we can move around and do things, all of that are kind of depending if you own your own finances. And if everything runs through centralized authorities and centralized parties, if they can just block you or censor you, if they decide to, I don't know if we're actually free, even if all other freedoms seems to be fine, because then they can shut just the finance up. So like, I like that example because it shows that financial freedom is very, very real, because without finances, you don't get resources. Without resources, you can't survive. Like, you need resources to survive.
Well said. I agree completely, Robin. I think a great framework for thinking about Bitcoin and thinking about monetary technology and money in general is as a freedom tool. And if we are working hard with our scarce time in this world and our scarce hours in the day, then, we create some value, and you have to choose where to store and protect that value. And maybe you choose dollars, maybe you choose real estate, maybe you choose bonds or Bitcoin or gold or silver. You have a bunch of decisions to make there. But if someone can then take whatever you've chosen to protect your value, and if they can take it from you, either in explicit ways, like literally just grab it and they have it and you no longer do, or more insidious, implicit ways, such as printing more of those things for themselves to dilute the purchasing power of the ones that you still hold, then really they can take your life, because they can take the value that you used your time in your life to earn from you. And so it's a form of enslavement, but it's just less obvious. A fun little inversion exercise that I encourage is when it comes to, fiat currency and how some of the traditional finance and banking system has evolved is put the lens on of someone who is, an evil authoritarian dictator or small group of people that wants to rule the world and control everyone and enslave everyone. And if you put that lens on, then you could say that some of the progression of money has actually been breakthrough innovations in theft technology. Like the US dollar today and fiat currency that is no longer backed by anything, no longer backed by gold since 1971 is a breakthrough innovation in theft technology, because suddenly they can steal from you in ways that you don't see and you don't understand. The ways they used to have to steal from you when their theft technology was less sophisticated was maybe clipping the edges off of coins and things like that to steal value from the people who were attempting to save. So currency debasement. But back then, those forms of currency were not as well suited for theft technology by those who control the money. And so we've gotten to this point where now not only is the dollar not backed by anything, but most dollars are digital. And so it is literally just keystrokes in computers and centralized databases that allow people to steal the value of hard workers thousands of miles away from them on the other side of the globe, potentially even outside of the US. There's a lot of the world that's trying to protect their value in the US dollar. And so the US dollar is an incredible innovation in theft technology.
I love that. Incredible innovation in theft technology. It's I never heard the words theft technology. I think that's a new one for me.
It's a fun one to play with.
But in general, the US dollar, but if we think about that decision, what PayPal and eBay did, and just as and putting myself as the CEO in that decision, I'm like, okay, if we are censoring transactions, not only are we making kind of a political stance here, but also with those transactions, I don't know how the revenue model of PayPal and eBay worked back then, but I guess with more transactions they made more money. So they're basically banning themselves from making more money. So there has to be some major incentive to do that. Were they scared of government, or was the government already involved in there? I don't know how much you can go in detail.
It was a little bit of both. And I certainly, I wasn't, in any rooms where I directly saw some, a black suited Men in Black looking figure come in and say, hey, PayPal, we, the government, hereby command you to do this. But, I think that companies like PayPal were and still today are deeply entangled with the government and function as an extension of the government. And so a lot of what PayPal needed to do in their early days just to survive and have a legitimate business around fraud and risk management, certainly that's important. You don't want fraudulent activity on your platform, both because it means you might not get paid and because it's, it's just like someone in your ecosystem is going to get shortchanged. And so you don't want those experiences to be facilitated by your platform. So all kinds of legitimate reasons to have protections and rules and acceptable use policies, terms of service, and so forth. But I think it is a function of size. Once you get so large, there are inevitably these pressures that get applied from regulators and from the government to take actions that the company might not otherwise would because the government wants them to be taken.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.